Good evening, and welcome to Truth Report. I'm Alex Truth, and tonight we are tracking some major shifts in the energy landscape that Wall Street doesn't want you connecting together.
And I'm Maya Clarity. From the deserts of Las Vegas to the waters of the Persian Gulf, from factory floors in Georgia to boardrooms where battery executives are scrambling to pivot, tonight's stories paint a picture of an energy transition that is messy, contested, and absolutely unstoppable.
We've got 5 stories tonight, and here's what's fascinating. Every single one of them revolves around the same fundamental question: who controls energy, and what happens when that control starts slipping away from the people who've held it for a century?
We're going to start with a construction industry that's going electric faster than most people realize, then move to a military attack on an oil tanker that exposes the real cost of fossil fuel dependence. We'll dig into why the phrase energy security is actually making us less secure, why US battery makers panicked too early, and how customs delays became a weapon against solar manufacturing on American soil.
So buckle in. This is Truth Report, and tonight we're following the money, the power, and the machines that are reshaping the world's energy future. Let's get to it.
Our first story takes us to Las Vegas, where the construction industry just had its biggest trade show of the year. CONEXPO 2026 wrapped up this week, and Alex, the headlines coming out of that event are genuinely remarkable.
Maya, this is one of those stories that doesn't get nearly enough mainstream attention. According to reporting from Electrek, this year's CONEXPO featured more zero-emission construction equipment than ever before in the event's history. We're not talking about concept vehicles or flashy prototypes. We're talking about production-ready electric machines from virtually every major manufacturer in the industry.
And let's talk about who showed up with what, because the breadth of this is important. Volvo Construction Equipment, one of the biggest names in the business, came with an expanded electric lineup. Caterpillar, the company whose yellow machines are practically synonymous with construction, was there with battery electric options. Komatsu, Liebherr, John Deere, these are the heavyweights, and they are all going electric.
What struck me most was the range of equipment on display. This wasn't limited to small utility vehicles or compact machines where electrification is relatively easy. We saw electric excavators built for serious earthmoving. We saw electric wheel loaders. There were electric haul trucks designed for mining and heavy construction operations. And at the smaller end, there were electric mini loaders specifically designed to fit through standard man doors for interior work.
That last detail is actually really telling, Alex. When manufacturers are designing electric equipment for specific use cases like fitting through doorways on renovation sites, that tells you this isn't a PR exercise. They're engineering these machines for the real-world conditions that contractors deal with every single day. The noise reduction alone is a game-changer for urban construction sites where noise ordinances limit working hours.
Absolutely. And let's talk about what's driving this, because it's not just environmental regulation, though that plays a role. Construction companies are doing the math, and the numbers increasingly favor electric. You eliminate diesel fuel costs, which on a large excavator can run hundreds of dollars per day. You dramatically reduce maintenance because electric drivetrains have far fewer moving parts than diesel engines. No oil changes, no filter replacements, no diesel particulate filter maintenance.
And there's the workforce angle that rarely gets discussed. Construction sites are loud, polluted environments. Diesel exhaust is a classified carcinogen. Workers operating in enclosed spaces like tunnels, basements, and warehouses are breathing that in all day. Electric equipment eliminates tailpipe emissions entirely, which is a direct health benefit for workers and for communities near construction sites.
The performance argument against electric construction equipment is also collapsing rapidly. The machines on display at CONEXPO were being marketed explicitly on their ability to match diesel on productivity. Electric motors deliver instant torque, which is exactly what you want when you're digging, lifting, or hauling heavy loads. Several manufacturers reported that operators who've tested both actually prefer the electric versions because of smoother power delivery and reduced vibration and noise fatigue.
Now here's the bigger picture question. Construction is one of the hardest sectors to decarbonize. It accounts for a significant share of global emissions, and the equipment runs hard in tough conditions. If this industry can go electric, and CONEXPO 2026 is strong evidence that it can, that undermines one of the last remaining arguments against broad electrification. The talking point that electric only works for passenger cars and light-duty applications is simply falling apart.
And the market signals are clear. These manufacturers are not investing billions in electric product lines out of charity. They see where regulations are heading in Europe, in California, and increasingly in major cities worldwide that are imposing zero-emission zones. They see the total cost of ownership math tilting toward electric. And frankly, they see that the companies who don't electrify are going to get left behind.
The construction industry transformation at CONEXPO is a signal of what's coming across heavy industry. But Alex, our next story shows us exactly why that transition can't come fast enough. Let's turn to the Persian Gulf, where the real cost of our fossil fuel dependence was on full display.
This is a story that should alarm anyone who cares about global energy security, and I mean real energy security, not the marketing slogan version. According to reporting from Middle East Eye, Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, announced that it attacked a Marshall Islands-flagged oil tanker in what represents a significant escalation of tensions in one of the world's most critical shipping corridors.
Let's unpack this carefully, because the details matter enormously. The Marshall Islands flag is significant. The Marshall Islands operates one of the largest ship registries in the world, and many tankers flagged there are actually owned or operated by Western shipping companies. This wasn't a random act. The IRGC publicly claimed responsibility, which means this was a deliberate, strategic message.
And the message is clear. Iran is signaling that it can and will disrupt the flow of oil through the region whenever it serves its strategic interests. This is happening against the backdrop of ongoing tensions between Iran and the United States, and it has direct implications for global oil prices, shipping insurance rates, and the broader question of energy supply chain vulnerability.
Here's what most coverage of these incidents misses. Every time a tanker is attacked, threatened, or even diverted in the Persian Gulf or the Strait of Hormuz, it sends a price signal rippling through global energy markets. Insurance premiums for tankers transiting the region spike. Some shipping companies reroute entirely, adding days and significant cost to deliveries. And all of those costs ultimately get passed on to consumers at the gas pump and in their utility bills.
This is the hidden tax of fossil fuel dependence that rarely shows up in the cost comparisons between oil and gas and renewable energy. When analysts compare the price of a kilowatt-hour from a natural gas plant versus a solar farm, they almost never include the military cost of keeping shipping lanes open, the insurance costs when those lanes become active conflict zones, or the economic disruption when supply is threatened.
And let's be direct about the geopolitical dimension. The United States has maintained a massive naval presence in the Persian Gulf for decades, at a cost of tens of billions of dollars per year, specifically to protect oil shipping routes. American service members are put in harm's way to ensure that tankers can move freely. That is a real cost measured in dollars, in strategic resources, and potentially in lives.
The IRGC attack on this tanker is a stark reminder that oil is not just a commodity. It is a strategic vulnerability. Every barrel of oil that flows through a contested waterway represents a point of leverage for hostile actors. And that leverage doesn't diminish as long as the global economy remains dependent on those supply chains.
Which brings us directly to our third story tonight, and the argument that the very concept of fossil fuel-based energy security is fundamentally flawed. This is a piece that cuts right to the heart of the energy debate.
CleanTechnica published a compelling analysis this week arguing that the phrase energy security, as it's traditionally used by politicians and fossil fuel industry advocates, actually describes a system that makes us less secure, not more. And after covering that tanker attack, Maya, I think the argument practically makes itself.
The core thesis is straightforward but powerful. When politicians talk about energy security, they almost invariably mean securing access to fossil fuels, oil, natural gas, coal. They mean maintaining supply chains that stretch across oceans, through contested waterways, and into politically unstable regions. They mean dependence on a finite resource that is concentrated in a handful of countries, many of which have interests that directly conflict with ours.
And the CleanTechnica analysis makes the critical point that this version of energy security requires enormous military expenditure to maintain. We just talked about the IRGC attack on that oil tanker. The United States spends a staggering amount defending global oil infrastructure and shipping lanes. That's not energy security. That's energy dependence with an armed escort.
The article drives home a quote that I think is worth highlighting. The idea that energy dominance doesn't come from the barrel of a rifle, it comes from harvesting the abundant energy of the sun. That's not poetry. That's a strategic assessment. Solar energy, wind energy, geothermal, these are resources that exist everywhere. They can't be blockaded. They can't be attacked by the IRGC. They can't be weaponized by any foreign government.
Let's think about what true energy security actually looks like. It looks like distributed generation, where homes, businesses, and communities produce their own electricity from rooftop solar and local wind installations. It looks like battery storage that provides resilience against grid disruptions. It looks like an energy system where no single point of failure, whether it's a pipeline, a shipping lane, or a foreign government's decision, can bring the whole system down.
And the economic argument is just as strong. The price of solar panels has fallen more than 90% over the past 15 years. Wind energy costs have dropped dramatically. Battery storage costs continue their downward trajectory. Meanwhile, fossil fuel prices are inherently volatile because they're subject to exactly the kind of geopolitical disruption we're covering tonight.
What's particularly frustrating is that the politicians who talk most loudly about energy security are often the same ones working to slow down the renewable energy transition. They use the language of security while advocating for policies that maintain our dependence on the most insecure energy supply chains imaginable. That's not just ironic. It's dangerous.
The analysis also points out that countries which have invested heavily in renewable energy are already reaping the security benefits. They're less exposed to oil price shocks, less vulnerable to supply disruptions, and less entangled in the military commitments required to protect fossil fuel infrastructure. True energy independence isn't a slogan. It's a solar panel on your roof and a battery in your garage.
And this connects directly to what we saw at CONEXPO. When construction equipment runs on electricity generated domestically from renewable sources, that entire supply chain is removed from geopolitical risk. No one can attack a solar farm in Nevada to disrupt a construction site in Chicago. That's real security.
Which brings us to our fourth story tonight, and it's one that reveals how the energy transition is playing out in the American market in sometimes surprising ways. U.S. battery manufacturers hit the panic button on EV sales, and Alex, the data suggests they may have jumped the gun.
This is a fascinating story from CleanTechnica that exposes a real miscalculation by the American battery industry. Here's the background. When the federal EV tax credit was eliminated last September, the market reacted exactly as you'd expect. EV sales in the United States dropped significantly. Consumers who had been on the fence suddenly faced paying full price, and many stepped back from their purchases.
And the battery manufacturers, seeing their biggest customer segment contract overnight, started to panic. Investment plans were scaled back. Expansion projects were delayed or shelved. The narrative in industry circles shifted quickly from the EV revolution is here to maybe we got ahead of ourselves. It was a crisis of confidence that rippled through the entire supply chain.
But here's what those manufacturers missed, and this is the critical insight from the reporting. The demand for batteries didn't actually disappear. It shifted. While EV sales pulled back, the market for stationary energy storage absolutely exploded. Utilities are buying battery systems at an unprecedented rate. Grid-scale storage projects are being deployed across the country. And the residential storage market is growing rapidly as homeowners pair batteries with solar installations.
Let's put some context around why stationary storage is booming. The electrical grid is under enormous strain. Extreme weather events are causing more frequent outages. Utilities need storage to manage the intermittency of renewable generation and to handle peak demand without firing up expensive and dirty peaker plants. And perhaps most importantly, the economics are increasingly favorable. Battery storage is becoming cost competitive with building new natural gas plants.
So the battery makers who saw the EV sales dip and hit the brakes on their plans were looking at one piece of a much larger puzzle. The fundamental demand driver for batteries isn't just electric vehicles. It's the entire energy transition. Every solar installation benefits from storage. Every wind farm needs it. Every utility trying to modernize the grid needs massive amounts of battery capacity.
And here's the strategic problem with the panic. While American battery manufacturers were pulling back, their competitors, particularly in China and South Korea, were not. They continued investing, continued expanding capacity, and continued driving down costs. The American manufacturers who retreated risked losing not just the EV market but the even larger stationary storage market to foreign competitors.
The CleanTechnica analysis makes an important point about industrial policy here. The elimination of the federal EV tax credit wasn't just a hit to consumers. It sent a negative signal to the entire domestic battery supply chain. Manufacturers, investors, and supply chain partners all read that policy decision as a lack of government commitment to electrification. And they made investment decisions accordingly.
But the underlying market fundamentals haven't changed. Batteries are a critical technology for the 21st century economy, regardless of what any single policy does. The question isn't whether battery demand will grow. It will. The question is whether American companies will capture that growth or cede it to foreign competitors. The manufacturers who kept investing through the EV sales dip are going to be in a much stronger position.
And there's a broader lesson here about the danger of short-term thinking in the energy transition. The shift to clean energy is not a straight line. There will be policy setbacks, market fluctuations, and moments of doubt. But the direction is clear, and the companies and countries that maintain their commitment through the turbulence are the ones that will lead the next energy era.
That's exactly right. And speaking of policy creating turbulence, our final story tonight is a case study in how government action, or in this case government inaction at the customs level, can directly undermine American manufacturing and American jobs.
This story hits hard. Electrek is reporting that solar panel giant Qcells, which operates major manufacturing facilities in Georgia, has been through a nightmare scenario that perfectly illustrates the contradictions in current U.S. energy policy. Back in early November 2025, the company was forced to furlough 1,000 workers, a full 25% of its American workforce, because of supply chain delays caused by U.S. customs.
Let's be very clear about what happened here because the details are infuriating. Qcells is exactly the kind of company that American energy policy should be supporting. They manufacture solar panels in the United States. They employ American workers. They invested heavily in Georgia factories specifically because the policy environment, including incentives from the Inflation Reduction Act, encouraged domestic solar manufacturing.
And then U.S. Customs began holding up their supply shipments. The components Qcells needs to manufacture solar panels in Georgia were sitting in customs limbo for weeks and months. Without those components, the factories couldn't run at full capacity. And when factories can't run, workers get furloughed. 1,000 people lost their paychecks not because of market conditions, not because of foreign competition, but because of their own government's bureaucratic processes.
Now the good news, and this is the update in the story, is that Qcells has announced that as of now, 4 months later, their solar panel output is finally back to normal production levels. Those workers are back on the job. The immediate crisis has passed. But the damage has been done, and the questions it raises are deeply troubling.
Here's what makes this story so maddening. The customs delays that crippled Qcells are related to enforcement actions ostensibly designed to prevent solar products made with forced labor from entering the U.S. market. That's a legitimate goal. Nobody is arguing that forced labor should be tolerated in any supply chain. But the implementation has been so heavy-handed and indiscriminate that it's punishing the very companies that are trying to do the right thing by manufacturing in America.
Qcells isn't importing finished solar panels from questionable sources. They're importing components to manufacture panels domestically. The customs enforcement mechanism is supposed to target bad actors, but instead it's creating a bottleneck that hurts American manufacturers and American workers. It's like setting up a roadblock to catch bank robbers but ending up stopping every commuter trying to get to work.
And the 4-month timeline is devastating from a business perspective. 4 months of reduced production means lost revenue, broken delivery commitments to customers, delayed solar installations, and enormous uncertainty for the workforce. Many of those furloughed workers likely had to find other employment during that period. Some may not come back. The institutional knowledge and trained workforce that Qcells invested in is not something you can just put on pause and restart without consequences.
There's also the chilling effect on future investment to consider. Qcells and other solar manufacturers are watching this situation and asking themselves whether the United States is really a reliable place to invest in manufacturing. If your supply chain can be disrupted for months by customs bureaucracy with no clear timeline for resolution, that's a massive business risk. Other countries are actively courting solar manufacturing investment and offering much more predictable regulatory environments.
And let's connect this to the broader political rhetoric around energy manufacturing. We constantly hear from politicians about the importance of bringing manufacturing back to America, about energy independence, about creating good jobs in the energy sector. Qcells did all of that. They built factories in Georgia. They hired American workers. And their reward was having their supply chain strangled by their own government's customs enforcement for 4 months.
The workers who were furloughed didn't care about trade policy abstractions. They cared about making their mortgage payments and putting food on the table. 1,000 families were directly impacted by this failure of policy implementation. That's the human cost that doesn't show up in the policy debate but absolutely shows up in communities across Georgia.
Now, Maya, this is where I want us to step back and connect all 5 of these stories, because the threads running through them form a pattern that tells us something profound about where the energy transition stands right now.
You're right, Alex. Let's lay it out. We started at CONEXPO, where every major construction equipment manufacturer is racing to electrify. That shows us the demand side, industries are ready for the transition and the technology is ready to deliver.
Then we covered an IRGC attack on an oil tanker, which shows us the cost side, the ongoing, escalating price we pay for dependence on fossil fuels shipped through contested waterways. Every one of those tanker attacks is an argument for energy sources that can't be blockaded or bombed.
Then we examined the fundamental bankruptcy of the energy security concept as it's traditionally defined, a system that requires military force to maintain and remains perpetually vulnerable to the actions of hostile actors. True energy security means energy that's generated locally from inexhaustible sources.
Then we saw American battery manufacturers panic at an EV sales dip caused by the removal of the federal tax credit, nearly ceding a massive growth market to foreign competitors. Short-term policy changes created short-term thinking that could have long-term strategic consequences. Meanwhile, the actual demand for batteries and stationary storage was surging right under their noses.
And finally, Qcells, an American solar manufacturer doing exactly what politicians say they want, manufacturing in America, employing American workers, getting kneecapped by their own government's customs delays. 1,000 workers furloughed for 4 months. That's not energy policy. That's energy sabotage.
The pattern, Maya, is a fundamental mismatch between where the energy market is heading and where policy is pointing. The market is screaming for electrification. The technology is ready. The economics are favorable. Companies are investing. And yet policy decisions, whether it's killing the EV tax credit or creating customs bottlenecks for solar manufacturers, keep throwing sand in the gears.
And who benefits from that sand in the gears? That's the question investigative journalism demands we ask. The fossil fuel industry benefits every time the energy transition is delayed. Every month that a solar factory runs below capacity, every quarter that battery investment is pulled back, every year that construction equipment keeps burning diesel, that's continued revenue for oil, gas, and coal.
Follow the money. The lobbying expenditures of the fossil fuel industry dwarf those of the renewable energy sector. The political donations flow overwhelmingly to candidates who support policies that slow the transition. And the revolving door between fossil fuel companies and government regulatory positions ensures that policy implementation often favors incumbents over challengers.
But here's what gives me hope, and I think CONEXPO is the best example of it. The transition is happening despite the obstacles. When every major equipment manufacturer independently concludes that Electrek is the future and invests accordingly, that's not ideology. That's engineering and economics. Markets are hard to stop once the fundamentals align, and the fundamentals have aligned for electrification.
The battery story reinforces that. Even when one segment dips because of a policy change, demand shows up somewhere else because the underlying need for energy storage is enormous and growing. The manufacturers who see past the quarterly noise and invest for the long term are going to win. The ones who panicked are going to wish they hadn't.
And the Qcells story, despite how frustrating it is, actually ends with a note of resilience. They fought through 4 months of customs delays and got production back to normal. They didn't shut down. They didn't leave the country. They pushed through because they know the demand for solar panels is only going to increase. American manufacturing can work if the government stops undermining it.
So here's where we land tonight. The energy transition is not a future event. It's happening now, on factory floors, at trade shows, in utility procurement offices, and in the strategic calculations of every major industrial company on the planet. The question is not whether it will happen. The question is whether the United States will lead it or be dragged into it kicking and screaming while other countries capture the economic benefits.
And that question is ultimately a political one. It depends on whether voters demand policies that accelerate the transition rather than obstruct it. It depends on whether the influence of incumbent fossil fuel interests is countered by the growing economic and political power of the clean energy sector. And it depends on whether enough people understand that true energy security means energy that no one can attack, embargo, or price gouge.
That oil tanker attacked by the IRGC this week is a floating symbol of everything wrong with the old model. As long as we depend on oil shipped through war zones, we will be paying the price in military spending, in economic volatility, and potentially in lives. The sun doesn't route through the Strait of Hormuz. The wind doesn't need a naval escort.
That's the bottom line for tonight. The stories are connected. The construction industry going electric, the attack on the tanker, the false promise of fossil fuel energy security, the battery industry's near-miss strategic blunder, the customs delays punishing American solar manufacturing. They're all chapters in the same story. The old energy world is fighting to hold on, and the new energy world is pushing through despite every obstacle thrown in its path.
For Truth Report, I'm Alex Truth. Do your own research on these stories. Follow the money. Ask who benefits when the transition slows down. The sources are in our show notes.
And I'm Maya Clarity. The future of energy isn't just a policy debate. It's a fight for economic independence, national security, and the health of the planet. Stay informed, stay critical, and we'll see you next time on Truth Report.